Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Dune Part 2. This was directed by Denis Villeneuve. Just to recap a little bit, I revisited Part 1 a couple weeks ago in preparation for this one just because I really didn't remember Part 1 much at all. It left very little of an impression on me, which was very disappointing considering how excited I was to see Denis Villeneuve's interpretation of the material. I suppose I had high expectations because I had seen Blade Runner 2049, which he had done previously. It's not a perfect film or anything, but I just thought that that film set a standard so high so far. It's just rich world building, aesthetic, shot compositions. And with Dune Part 1, it wasn't a bad film necessarily. It didn't make me angry. It didn't rile me up or anything like that. To me, it felt kind of boring. It lacked personality. Aesthetically, it wasn't very interesting. I think it's minimalist to a fault. I wanted a lot more tactile elements in it, and I wanted there to be more emotional weight, even if it is a first entry. I look at David Lynch's version of Dune, which I know I've talked about ad nauseum on here, but I will repeat myself for new viewers. But, we all know that film is a complete train wreck, and Lynch himself rejects the film, and I fully support him on that. He has a right to. It is all over the place, and, it has a lot of campy, kind of cheeky, eccentric elements to it that aren't necessarily striking the right tone that I'm looking for in maybe my ideal interpretation of Dune, but at least it's weird, it's interesting, it's creative. And I'm just a lot more taken with that aesthetically, more taken with the world building there, the costume design, the performances, just the imagination of it. It has a kind of a cult, edgy vibe, and it never loses that thread of those off-kilter moments throughout it. So I think stuff like that helps it have a much stronger, more bold point of view, and it's less slick, it's less cold, it's more memorable, it has soul. And I think both Dunes are trying to find that balance between the art house and maybe the more accessible blockbuster, and I just think Lynch's version has more of a pulse compared to this one. Villeneuve just prefers more clean and cold lines, but sometimes I think it can become a little bit too glossy in the case of Dune. But in something like Blade Runner 2049, the minimal coldness I think is really strong. It's rich. It has a very Kafka-esque, angular quality to it. And now having seen Dune Part 2, I will say just right off the bat, it's bigger. It is much bigger so far as scope, and truly when they say that Part 1 felt kind of like an appetizer, this one feels like the main course. They really mean it. I don't think that's an oversell at all. And the original film was difficult for me to review for those reasons, because it felt so introductory, so expository. We didn't really get to sink our teeth into the characters and the relationships in a way that felt satisfying for me. So I was really hoping that we would get a lot more of that in this one. But again, I have a lot of the same problems with Part 2 that I had with Part 1. Yes, there is a lot more to like here. The ambition of this really pleases me. And yeah, I think the character dynamics are naturally going to be more interesting. You're introducing new characters that are more interesting here. And there is a natural attempt to raise the stakes, and that's very important so far as tension. But something just isn't clicking. Something isn't right. And I know that this is Denis Villeneuve's dream project. He's always wanted to do this, but something so far as the ambition is just not matched in the results. So we end up having material that does feel sterile. A lot of it is half-baked considering the complexity of the source material, and I just simply can't connect to this emotionally. And you can really feel with Part 2, the marketing and everything. It's like they have these big red carpet premiere events where the actors are like walking around in Queen Amidala costumes and all of this. But yeah, the feeling of it is as if we're trying to generate all of this excitement as if Part 1 really touched a nerve with the public. And I don't think it did. It's that feeling of like, this is like Fellowship of the Ring or Mad Max Fury Road, movies that really, really resonated with people. But I just don't think people care about this as much. I'm not saying there aren't fans. I just don't think it's on the same level of that. It just feels kind of like empty padding and excess. I know a lot of people have seen, early previews of the film, and a lot of people have been talking about, wow, this is so mind-blowing, it's a return to the great epic filmmaking of the past that we've been missing for so long. And to a degree, I can agree with that, but in other ways, I don't. The film does have some really stunning shots, absolutely stunning. Silhouettes with the hair blowing in the desert and all of that. Very Lawrence of Arabia in style. That's an obvious comparison there. And while I don't think the film ever really found its flow so far as cohesion, in my opinion, it was always dabbling. It was hinting at real brilliance, hinting at those worlds that we got from, like, the great David Lean films or like the great Sergio Leone films. I think there's certain shots and maybe certain sections that I think they would kind of be proud of. There were times where I was getting a whiff of those old, like, Cinerama type movies. I love the slow boil build into a big epic sequence. That is some of my favorite filmmaking. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of that here. At least I didn't feel the build in a lot of these sequences. There's still a lack of tension here and a weight to a lot of the morals, a lot of the themes, a lot of the story feels half-baked as well. And I just feel like a lot of the emotional beats, everything just feels kind of on the same level. That's unfortunate. I will say the first act really stood out to me. I liked that section. I thought it was the strongest in the film so far as Cohesion, especially when it comes to building the story. It was one of the few times where I really felt they were paying attention to that centering and giving us a place to start so we can build from it. And in part two, I think my favorite sequence from just a visual perspective and an action perspective was the beginning, where Paul is first learning to ride the Sandworm. And I liked it just because, yeah, it reminded me of the old Hollywood cinematic look. It starts very silent and then it starts to grow and it becomes this really spectacular thing. I wish they were more confident in those silent moments, really allow that eeriness of the desert to really take hold of us before the big boom. But I do like that once we see the worm, we're locked into Paul's perspective for a while. We really stay in that, and that really disorients us as audience members. But I love how the movie starts to expand its perspective as Paul slowly starts to gain control. All of that's fantastic. It was thrilling from an emotional standpoint. It is more satisfying. We'll just ignore the fact that these sandworms do look like assholes made of pine needles. While I do think that the sandworms are way more interesting in the second one, I still have a lot of the same problems I did in part one with them, so far as, yes, the images of these worms look amazing. Like in still shots, you might think, holy crap, that's going to be a spectacular sequence. But I don't know, there's something about these worms, while they're designed beautifully to a degree, they're a little bit too slick. I think they move a little bit too quickly. There's something about the CGI that we lose the tread in the tires. I wanted more grit, again, a more slow experience. I think of like video games like Shadow of the Colossus, where you want to talk about like epic scale and really making us feel the heft of everything, and there's tension in that that's so beautifully done, even though it is a video game. That's more what I was looking for. You feel the impact of that threat much more for sure. But yeah, when I look at part one and part two, there's just something very lopsided about both of them. You know, the first one being maybe too expository. The second one, we're just pouring in so many new different elements to it that it's almost maybe too much, even though this is nearly 3 hours. And there's a lot going on here so far as plot. There's a lot of politics. And a lot of this movie just felt like we were barely touching on a lot of that. It did feel, again, like I said, skeletal and half-baked. And even with a movie this long, it's like we don't have the time to really marinate in those juices, and I want to. And I know Villeneuve has talked quite recently about how when it comes to being a filmmaker, he's not very interested in dialogue. He's so much more interested in the visual experience of a movie. And to a degree, I agree with him. I tend to be more on his side of things when it comes to what I prefer myself. But again, this is Dune, which has a lot going on in it, and I just don't, if your images don't really connect to the emotion of the story or a lot of the themes in the story, then I don't find a lot to admire in those images other than the fact that they're gorgeous images. And I also find it perplexing that you have all of these amazing actors in this movie and all these different artists coming together, and it's like somehow you still drain a lot of the personality out of that. And I'm confused what the point is so far as casting some of these people. Now, some of the performers are fantastic. I think Javier Bardem, as an example, is the standout here. He does everything right. He provides warmth and humor in the movie, but he also feels like a real person who has lived among these people his whole life. He's weary. He has something to fight for. And he's just very likable. And I think we need likability in this film to a degree. But I also think that Javier Bardem is just wonderful in pretty much everything I see him in. I also found some of the females to be well cast, like Rebecca Ferguson as an example, or Charlotte Rampling. There is this feminine quality to it, but it's also chilling and charismatic and even volatile, and that's very important. That was something that I felt was kind of missing in Dune Part 1, just kind of this feminine angle that's a little bit different than what you're used to. But then you're casting people like Florence Pugh, and it's like, why? I feel like you could have just cast anybody here because this is a completely dead part. Florence is such a strong actress, and I think one of her big strengths is her emotional performance, and yet this one, there's nothing for her to do here. Now, maybe there is more to look forward to with her character in future installments, but just as this one stands, that's what I'm going to comment on. And I'm also really perplexed about her father, is played by Christopher Walken. And again, that was a much bigger what the fuck. Obviously, Walken has a certain reputation so far as being an actor in Hollywood, and the type of performance he does. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, if they're going to cast him, maybe they're going to do something a little bit eccentric or funny. Just break up the clean monotony in this movie. But no, again, it's very straightforward. I feel like anybody could have done it, so I just don't get the point. And I think Austin Butler is maybe the major example I want to use, just because, I mean, first of all, he looks like an albino Nazi. And clearly they really wanted to unsettle us with his presence, his whole look, and his performance. But I just don't think that the performance, any of it, pushed far enough, because I don't think that that's what Denis Villeneuve is really good at. Finding the visceral and the strange and the grotesque in this minimalism. I needed, some sort of darkness, unsettling emotional crux for the antagonistic force in the film, because I do think it really kind of rests on the shoulders of Austin Butler here. But the whole character just felt more like AI rendered rather than developed organically by the actor. This same character is portrayed by Sting in the original film, and you just take one look at him, and it's far more interesting than anything that Austin Butler is doing throughout the entire film. Literally one shot of Sting, and you never forget it. Oiled up, so there's that humor there and the cheekiness, but it's also intimidating and unsettling. And it's, again, sad because I really like Austin Butler, and I'm rooting for him as an actor. Now, it was not a bad performance or anything like that. It's just like, come on, man, give us something. Do something weird, do something fucked up that's gonna send chills down my spine. Give us these tactile moments so that when we do have this big duel, this climactic duel at the end of the movie, I'm not completely zoning out. Because I'm going to be very honest with you, I completely zoned out during that. I pride myself on being honest on this channel, and I found very little to connect to, even though I could admire certain aspects of it. Now, of course, this is a very elevated filmmaker, so it's like he has a team behind them that is full of amazing, talented artists, and obviously he has amazing taste, and a lot of the people he has on his team he trusts because they have amazing taste, especially compared to a lot of, the typical blockbuster movies that we might see. But I can't help but just feel that this film, both films, are just lacking in a lot of what makes great epic filmmaking resonate with people. And I know that's just my personal opinion. We're all allowed to have them, but I know many people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine, but it's not landing for me. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are great. Guys, thank you so much for your support, and welcome to all the new members. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.